Next, we're going to add, and we're gonna name this one the walk. So this is gonna be the walk cycle. And at this point, it's probably a good idea to start adding the animations in the animator. So we're gonna do that with window animation, and our character doesn't currently have any animations. Okay, we're going to create an animation clip, and it's going to tell us, okay, where exactly do we want to save this new animation? But before we hit enter on that, let's go ahead and create a new folder for our character. So maybe we're going to call, okay, so we're going to call this guy player. We can save stuff inside this player folder. We're going to create a new folder for animations just to keep things a little bit more organized. So this is the folder that we're going to end up creating new animations in. So window, animation, animation, create. And this is when I have the player selected, okay? Okay, so assets, player, animations. This one's going to be idle. We can have a state for an animation for the idle, and we also want to create a new clip for walk. Save. Closing down that scene. Okay. In our animator, so before we actually do any of the animations, in our animator, we can take a look at our animator and see that it's created two new states. These states aren't transitioning to each other yet. And, and it's rigged up this animation to point, to belong to this state, and this animation to belong to the walk state. Next, we kind of want to start animating this thing. Okay, so what's the easiest way to do that? Probably by looking at the actual animations. So player, going back to animation, animation window. And idle, we need idle because this is simply a state that, things can end up going back to. But idle really won't be doing anything. There won't be any samples. Samples can be 0. And what we're going to do is we're going to add an animation event. Oh, sorry, no. We're going to add a property. The properties that we need to animate 2 properties on the managed sprite. Okay, so we're going to animate 2 properties of this guy, and we're going to animate. It's not showing here in Sprite Manager, but it's called frame. Add property, manage sprite. On Sprite Manager, there is a property in the script called current frame that can be animated. So we add that, and then we also need to add another field, which is the current state index. So in current state index, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to delete the end frame. Our idle animation simply has one little frame. It doesn't have any real animation. Samples are going to be 0 samples. And okay, so let me drag this out so you see the actual names a little bit better. So these things correspond to the current state index corresponds to these state numbers here, and this is a state array. So what we need to set the idle to is 0. Okay, so this one always has to be 0. Add a key. We already see that it's 0, 0. Okay. And current frame is going to be frame. He has one frame, But since, indexing in C# is done as zero-based indexing, we're going to start with current frame 0. Okay? This is going to be the first frame is actually the 0 frame. And you just have to keep that in mind. So I'll show you what that looks like for the walk animation next. So anyway, now that we've set this thing up, when we hit play, clearly there's nothing to really see because our idle frame really just has, our idle animation has one frame. There's not really doing anything. Our next animation is going to be the walk animation. We're going to add the same two properties. So sprite manager, current frame, and then sprite manager, current state index. Okay, and in this case, our current state index needs to be set to 1 because this is gonna point it to this animation belongs to this state. This state belongs to this animation and vice versa. So these both have to be set to 1. Okay, so that's the current state. And now let's also set up our actual animation. So first we need to set up our frames. What exactly is that going to look like? If we close this guy down. So this is the north direction when he's pointing, away from the camera. We have, let's find them. What I've done is we've created 3 frames for the walk animation. So this is the idle direction. This is the idle position. Then this is the north left foot forward, and then north right foot forward. So here's how we're going to rig up this this walk cycle. We're going to say it has 4 frames. Okay, and it starts with the north idle position. And then we're going to say, okay, then it's 1 foot forward. Then he goes back to his regular position. And then the left, and then the other foot forward. And then as it cycles through this, it basically looks like it walks. So now that we've set up that for the north position and we're pointing in the north position so that, we can kind of see this guy animating, if we open up our animation, we can then create the states for this thing. So we're going to say we're going to have 4 samples. Oh boy, and where's the other keyframe? Okay, this guy, we can bring him into 4, focus. Okay, so this entire animation, what we're saying is it's going to have 4 samples, 4 frames. It's going to take all of 1 second, an entire second. It's going to end here. And now we need to start adding keyframes for our current frame. Okay, so current frame means when the animation starts, it's gonna point to this frame, 0 frame. Next, we're gonna add a key here for frame 2, frame 3, and frame 4. Okay. All right, now what exactly do we need to do? So between here and here, it needs to point to frame 0, right, the first frame. Between here, between the next, for the next frame, it needs to point to frame 1. Edit, next is frame 2. When it gets to here, it needs to be on third frame, which is frame, okay, 0, 1, 2. And then finally, the last frame is going to be at value 3. And then this last one just stays on 3. So that way we have a continuation. Now, you know, you can set these things to, what is it, constant. So left tangent. Okay, so you can basically, this will end up having this exact same effect as the, you know, left tangent constant. So if you do this, this is effectively the animation that we're creating. Now when we hit play, we see that, you know, he's actually he's performing those actions. When we change the perspective, though, we haven't set up the other directions yet, but we can see him in this direction. So he's actually, you know, walking. Um, but mind you, these things don't really need to be. What is that? Near. Anyway, you don't have to mess with the default tangents. You just have to make sure that your keyframes end up at the right values when you need them to actually change. So auto, you can go ahead and set these back to auto. If you liked that, you know, clamped stuff, this constant one, if it makes it easier for you to understand exactly what's going on, feel free to use that. Okay. So now that we've created the frame animation, we don't have to change this piece for each direction, but we do have to set up the rest of the frames for the other directions. Go ahead and do that now. So for northeast, let's find the frames that belong to northeast stuff. So there's northeast 1. Okay, and northeast right leg forward. Then, you know, the regular northeast idle position, then northeast left foot forward. And we're going to continue that throughout the rest of the, so right foot forward for frame 2, left foot forward for frame 4, southeast direction, right foot forward, left foot forward, south direction, right foot forward, left foot forward, and all the way around the wheel. Right, left, until we have everything filled in. Northwest. Right, left. All right, so now we see that all the directions have the correct frames. We set up our one animation. Again, we can preview that in the animation pane. Walk preview. So now as we rotate around our character, let's focus on our character, rotate this guy around, and we're in preview mode, and we see that he is animating correctly. Okay. We hit stop. All right, now the thing is, when we go into play mode, he's not going to be walking yet. Okay. He's simply only doing the sprite management for the idle state so far. All right, so now to make him actually walk inside of the game scene, we have to play around with the animator a bit. So we've set up the actual animations and they work. However, we don't have any transitions between these states in our animator. Here's how we're going to do that. So first we're going to say make transition from here to here. And we're going to do a reverse transition from walk to idle. We create the transitions, and now we have to create triggers that will trigger these transitions. Okay. Now, the person player controller that I've added to the character kind of has some built-in things that um, make this thing work a certain way. And those fields are defined here on the person controller, which is simply defines some values that I used for like my basic animation rig. So first is something called attack started. One is something that defines whether the character is grounded. And these are going to be, one is a Boolean, defining whether the character is moving is a Boolean, defining whether the character is running, this is also a Boolean, and then a Boolean for a jump when a jump starts. So we need to add those parameters into here as Booleans. Our animator, we want to do, okay, so what was it? It was is moving. So let's start with is moving for now. In idle, he is not going to be moving, and in walk, he is going to be moving. So we want to transition from idle to the walk motion when is moving is enabled. Moving is true. And then we want him to go back to idle position when is moving is false. And the other thing that we want to set is we need to make sure that there doesn't need to be any transition for these transitions. There's no overlap between these. And the exit time doesn't have any specific exit time. Exit time means that it has to get to a certain part of the animation before it can actually exit the animation. In our case, that will generally never be the case. We just want transitions to happen right away. The same with idle, so there is no exit time and there is no transition duration. Okay, so now that we've set up these two transitions, let's see if we set this thing up correctly in our game. So our controller is now setting in that script is setting the is moving parameter to true when we move around, and then it's setting it back to false when he's standing still and he's in idle mode. And so we've got that part working.